Hey everyone, it's Scott from certmedia.com. Today I'm going to be going over the first meaningful paint measurement found in PageSpeed Insights and in Lighthouse. I'll be going over what it means, what you can do to improve it, and particularly how it differs from first contentful paint. I will preface this video by saying as of Lighthouse version 6.0, first meaningful paint is depreciated, which means in a future PageSpeed Insights, it may be removed or replaced. But as it's still in there, we are going to be talking about it. First meaningful paint is when the primary content of the page that is visible to the user is painted and it's visible. First meaningful paint is typically within a fraction of a second between the user clicking the page and it drawing the measurement. It's going to be only a fraction of a second apart from first contentful paint because they're essentially almost the same timing. First contentful paint and first meaningful paint do differ though, particularly if the page has certain types of content above the fold. If the page has an iframe above the fold, the first meaningful paint could be impacted by the content in the iframe, but the first contentful paint ignores iframe content. Now, iframes by most use cases are just not used much anymore. They're particularly used for ads and maybe YouTube embeds, but you don't see them too often now on websites. You will note, while my score is identical to one another, if you go to the CNN, there is a slight difference in the contentful paint versus the meaningful paint. And this has to do with the video up top being loaded via an iframe. This is an iframe that's embedded, so it's impacting the mobile first contentful paint and meaningful paint. And if you go to the desktop, they're still only a fraction of a second apart, but it's noticeable. So first contentful paint and meaningful paint are based on data that are generated in the HTTP archive, which ultimately helps compile your score. This is going to be just like how the first contentful paint has a certain range it has to be met, so does your meaningful paint. So for your mobile users to get into the green zone, you typically need to be within 0 to 2 seconds. Then that's going to cover the 75 percentile of websites. So that's going to be within 75 to 100% of websites. That would put you up there in that ranking. If you want to get in the orange, which is going to be average, which would be from 50 to 74 percentile, you would get, it's like a 2 to 4 range. And then the first meaningful paint as red as typically anything over 4 seconds. And 4 seconds is really bad for first meaningful paint. This means that mobile users are not going to be getting any sort of positive feedback from the page, and your abandonment rate typically goes up. Typically, when pages are being loaded, users have to get some feedback in the form of text or an image or something that it's being downloaded, or else they're more likely to bounce off of the page. This is why I tend to put such a strong focus on first meaningful and first contentful paint for measuring your website's performance, because if you have a very large and complex page like CNN's, where it's taking 42 seconds for the CPU to idle, you would really want the content that's above the fold to be available quickly and then have all that other nonsense being done in the background. It matters a little bit less to the end user if there's been data going on in the background for the past 45 seconds, if they got to read your content in the first 3. What this does to your score, though, is quite interesting. Lighthouse and PageSpeed Insights have a very interesting score in how it's calculated. So normally when the first meaningful paint and the contentful paint are the same, their scores are going to be identical. But let's say that your first contentful paint is half of your first meaningful paint, then you can actually get a very large difference between how these scores are calculated. And since they've been removed in the newest version of Lighthouse, they don't really have a good score guide anymore. But it's supposed to effectively break down into it being weighted about the same as your first meaningful paint. So your website's going to be basically, it's going to treat it like this. If you have a 20% first contentful paint, that's going to be its weight. The speed index rating is going to calculate itself to be about 10% of your weighted score. The first meaningful paint shares the exact same amount as first contentful paint. Now, this is in Lighthouse 6. It's still 20% weight, but since this is likely to be depreciated and dropped in the future, this is going to affect your scoring in the next few months. Your time to interactive is equal to 15% of your score, and then your total blocking time, which is going to be your max potential first input delay, is going to be about 20%. It used to carry more weight for the first CPU idle time, but that's been since dropped in the Lighthouse 6 scoring guide. Another note is that while Lighthouse calculates its scores differently, PageSpeed Insights might use its own means of measuring and determining score. Neither one of the teams, while they work together, they don't do exactly the same thing. PageSpeed Insights has different parameters than the stock Lighthouse has run in your browser. But the easiest way to get the score up in both cases is going to be the same thing as the first contentful paint. You want to make sure that your JS is deferred, your images are compressed, they're lazy loaded if possible, you're using a CDN, and you're not delivering a large amount of CSS if at all possible, using critical CSS. So inlining the critical assets into the header and then loading the rest via async will go a long way towards improving user experience and ultimately the load time of the website. Other than that, it's just another important metric to keep low. Typically, if you have a good first contentful paint time, your first meaningful paint time is also going to be just as good. If you have any questions about the first meaningful paint, you can ask it in the comment section below. If you want me to optimize your website, you can feel free to contact me on my website and we can discuss it. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.